Please, I'll be your wife," cried the Apache widow. The cowboy's next move stunned everyone. The sun hung low over the dusty horizon, casting long shadows across the small frontier town of Red Rock. It was the kind of town that seemed almost frozen in time, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and strangers were noticed immediately. Samuel Carter, a young cowboy in his late 20s, rode into the town quietly, his horse kicking up clouds of dust as he guided it down the main street. Frowned. Indesperate, Samuel was a man of calm strength, with sharp eyes that missed little and a presence that commanded respect without needing to speak. But he had just finished a long cattle drive that had taken him across vast stretches of open prairie, and the work had left him weary, but he was used to long journeys and hard days. Red Rock, unlike some towns Samuel had passed through, was alive with tension. The air felt thick with stories of recent Apache raids, and whispers of widows struggling to manage alone drifted through the wooden buildings and narrow streets. Children ran past him, their laughter ringing, but there was an underlying caution in the eyes of the townsfolk. Samuel sensed it immediately. He had lived long enough in the West to read signs. Unease, worry, and fear all left marks in the way people carried themselves, and Red Rock carried them heavily. Breaths. Samuel tethered his horse outside the trading post, the heart of the town where supplies and news flowed freely. He dismounted slowly, patting the horse's neck with a gentle hand before entering the small wooden building. Breaths. Inside, the smell of leather, coffee, and wood smoke greeted him. Behind the counter, a burly man with a thick beard and sun-weathered skin greeted him with a nod. "Afternoon, stranger," he said gruffly. "You look like you've been on the trail a while." Samuel nodded, offering a polite smile. "Long ride," he said simply. "Looking for some supplies before I head further west." As he browsed the shelves, carefully checking the quality of rope, saddles, and provisions, he noticed a woman enter the trading post. She moved with quiet grace, but carried herself with a strength that immediately drew attention. Her dark hair was pulled back in a braid, and her eyes held a mixture of sorrow and determination. Burra, widow from the nearby Apache settlement. Since the death of her husband in a skirmish months before, she had been managing her small homestead and raising her young son alone. She had become a quiet, almost shadow-like presence in town, someone who drew attention not because of talk, but because of the quiet confidence in her movements. Samuel watched her from across the store, noting the careful way she selected her supplies, the way she checked the weight of the bags and counted her coins with exact precision. He had seen many people in his life, from cowboys to townsfolk to travelers, but there was something about Ayanna that made him pause. It wasn't just her beauty, though her features were striking, but a sense of resilience, of a spirit tempered by loss and hardship. Ayanna, for her part, noticed the new cowboy in town. There was nothing about him that seemed threatening. He carried himself with a calm authority, not arrogance, and his eyes showed a depth of understanding that was rare among strangers. Still, she remained cautious. Trust did not come easily to her, especially with the stories she had heard of cowboys who took more than they gave, or of men who had no respect for her people. She kept her voice low, polite but firm, as she spoke to the trader about what she needed. Samuel approached the counter, offering a friendly nod. "Afternoon," he said. "I'm looking for some rope, and maybe some extra feed for my horse. Traveling light, but need to be prepared." The trader nodded, busy with his own work. "Rope's over there. Feed's in the back." Desperate. "You new in town?" Samuel nodded again. "Just passing through." As he turned to gather his items, Ayanna's voice caught his attention. "Excuse me," she said softly, but with a firmness that carried in the quiet of the store. "Do you have any extra nails? My fence is broken, and I need to repair it before winter comes." Samuel glanced at her and saw the urgency in her eyes. Desperation, exactly, but a clear understanding of the challenges she faced. Without thinking much, he replied, "I can help you with that. I've got some nails in my pack and I can lend a hand if you want." Ayanna raised her eyebrows slightly, surprised by the offer. Most men would not speak to her directly, and fewer still would offer help without expecting something in return. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you," she said simply. The townsfolk in the store noticed the interaction. Whispers spread quietly. An outsider, a cowboy, offering help to the Apache widow. Some were impressed, others skeptical. But Samuel didn't seem to notice the attention. His focus was on Ayanna and her practical needs, not the opinions of others. Over the next few days, Samuel's presence in the town became more noticeable. He helped deliver supplies to the outskirts, checked in on the homesteads, and offered small acts of kindness wherever needed. Whenever he saw Ayanna, they exchanged polite words at first, then gradually longer conversations. She told him about her late husband, a strong and honorable man taken too soon, and about her son, who was the center of her world. Samuel listened quietly, never judging, never offering empty comfort. His respect for her grew with each story, and she, in turn, began to see that not all strangers brought harm. Brush. One evening, Samuel helped her repair a broken fence on her property. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over the landscape, and they worked in silence for a while, the only sounds being the scrape of tools and the soft whinny of horses nearby. Ayanna finally spoke, breaking the quiet. "It's strange," she said softly, almost to herself. "I've lived here alone for months, and now someone cares enough to help without asking anything in return." Samuel paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's not strange," he said simply. "Sometimes people do what's right because it's right. Doesn't need a reason." Ayanna looked at him, considering his words. Brett. There was honesty in his voice, something rare in a world where so much was selfishness or fear. She nodded slowly, a small smile forming. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope, not just for herself, but for the life she could build for her son, with someone she could trust. By the end of the week, their connection had grown quietly but meaningfully. Brave. Samuel was no longer just a passing cowboy. He had become a presence in her life, someone who could be relied upon. And Ayanna, who had learned to rely on no one, was slowly allowing herself to accept that help and, perhaps, even friendship. The town of Red Rock watched these developments with mixed feelings. Some admired the growing bond, sensing the courage it took for two very different people to trust one another. But others whispered doubts, wondering if the widow and the cowboy could truly find a future together. But Samuel and Ayanna paid little attention. They were focused on the work, the survival, and the small, meaningful moments that built trust. As the first part of their story drew to a close, the horizon glowed with the promise of change. Samuel would remain in Red Rock for a time, not just as a traveler passing through, but as someone who had found a reason to stay. And Ayanna, once isolated and cautious, began to feel the stirrings of companionship, a connection that might grow into something far greater than either had expected. For now it was just the beginning, quiet, unassuming, and filled with the simple acts of kindness and respect that would shape the rest of their lives. The townsfolk might not yet understand the bond forming between the cowboy and the Apache widow, but the two of them knew that sometimes in the harshness of the frontier, trust and care could be the most powerful forces of all. After that first week of cautious introductions and shared labor, Samuel Carter continued to make himself a familiar presence in Ayanna's life. He had no grand plans, no intentions beyond helping where he could, but the quiet respect he showed her and her son began to mean more than he realized. Ayanna, for her part, noticed the difference between him and the other men she had encountered in her life. He did not rush her, nor did he speak over her. He simply listened, observed, and acted when it was needed. Their days began to settle into a rhythm. Samuel would rise early, tending to his horse and finishing the small chores required on the homestead. Ayanna, her son close by, worked to prepare meals, mend clothes, and maintain the fragile boundaries of her land. Often Samuel would join her, offering assistance with heavier tasks, lifting sacks of flour, stacking firewood, or reinforcing the fence. Their conversations, at first practical and brief, slowly grew longer. One afternoon, as the sun beat down mercilessly on the prairie, Ayanna leaned on her broom, wiping sweat from her brow. "Breath. You've done more than I expected, Samuel," she said quietly. "Most men would have just ridden past, but you stayed." Samuel shrugged lightly, trying to make it seem casual. "I've been on the trail long enough to know who needs help, and besides," he added with a small smile, "it's easier to work together than alone." Ayanna studied him, the faint crease of concern on her forehead softening. "It's not just the work," she said. Breath. "It's the way you understand, I guess. You don't treat me like I'm fragile or weak. Breaths. You treat me like I'm human." Samuel met her gaze, his own expression unreadable. "That's because you are. And anyone who can survive this land alone deserves respect." Her son, a small boy with wide, curious eyes, ran past them, laughing as he chased a chicken across the yard. Samuel bent to help him steady the chicken coop, showing the boy how to lift it without hurting himself or the animals. Ayanna watched this simple interaction and felt something warm in her chest. Her son, who had grown used to caution and distrust, laughed freely for the first time in weeks. Passable. Samuel's presence was bringing small moments of joy into their lives, and she began to realize that these moments were rare treasures in a world that had given her so many hardships. As days turned into weeks, the bond between Samuel and Ayanna deepened. They shared stories of their pasts. Samuel spoke of his childhood on a small ranch in Texas, of long days spent tending cattle, and of the freedom he found on the open plains. A strong, proud man who had loved her fiercely, and of the challenges she had faced after his death. She spoke of nights when hunger and fear had threatened to overwhelm her, and of the determination that kept her moving forward. Patient, Samuel listened patiently, never interrupting, never offering empty sympathy. One evening, as they sat near the small fire outside her cabin, Samuel asked softly, "Do you ever feel breaths lonely?" Ayanna paused, staring into the flames. "Every day," she admitted. "But loneliness is something you learn to live with. It teaches you to survive." Samuel nodded slowly. "I know what you mean," he said. "I've been alone plenty of times, too. But sometimes it helps to have someone you can trust, someone who understands." She looked at him, considering his words. There was a quiet honesty in his voice, a sense that he spoke from experience rather than sentiment. "Braish, trust isn't easy for me," she said, finally. "Not after losing him. Not after everything." "I understand," Samuel replied gently. "And I don't expect you to trust me right away. I just want you to know that I'm here if you need me." It was a simple promise, but for Ayanna it carried weight. In the harshness of the frontier, promises were rare, and trust even rarer. Samuel's words planted a small seed of hope, one that grew quietly as the days passed. Their relationship began to attract attention in Red Rock's past, the townsfolk whispered as they saw the cowboy spending time with the Apache widow, helping her around the homestead and sharing meals. Some admired the connection, recognizing the courage it took for two very different people to trust each other. Others were skeptical, questioning whether such a bond could ever last, or if it was even proper in the eyes of society. But Samuel and Ayanna paid little attention to gossip. They were focused on the work at hand and on the small, meaningful moments they shared. One afternoon, a problem arose that tested their growing connection. A sudden storm rolled over the prairie with fierce winds and heavy rain. Ayanna's young son ran into the cabin screaming as the windows rattled. Samuel immediately sprang into action, securing the cabin's doors and helping move livestock to safer areas. Ayanna watched him work with precision and care, realizing that his presence brought not just companionship, but safety and stability in moments of danger. After the storm passed, they sat together on the porch, soaked and muddy, but safe. Ayanna handed Samuel a cloth to dry his hands, and for the first time, she allowed herself to linger near him without fear. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here," she admitted. "You would have managed," Samuel said with a faint smile. "You're stronger than you realize, but it helps to have someone by your side." Her son climbed onto Samuel's lap, and for a moment the three of them sat quietly, watching the clouds part and the sun return. The bond forming between Samuel and Ayanna was no longer just practical. It had become emotional. They cared for each other's well-being, shared moments of laughter and quiet, and began to trust each other in ways that neither had expected. In the evenings, as they repaired fences, fed the animals, or simply sat by the fire, they began to share small personal habits and routines. Samuel taught Ayanna how to tend to certain cattle problems he had learned on his drives, while she showed him how to track the land for signs of danger, a skill her husband had passed down to her. Each lesson was small, practical, and essential, but it also brought them closer, forming a partnership based on respect, trust, and shared experience. Their growing friendship became a quiet story of hope in the town of Red Rock, Braish. The children of the town, curious and unafraid, began to watch them from a distance, learning the value of cooperation and kindness. The adults began to notice the changes in both Samuel and Ayanna. He seemed more patient, more grounded, while she appeared more at ease, her shoulders no longer so tense from months of solitary struggle. One day, as Samuel helped repair a broken cart for the local blacksmith, Ayanna approached with a small basket of fresh bread. She handed it to him with a shy smile. "I made this for you," she said simply, "for all the help you've given." Samuel took the basket, smiling warmly. "Thank you," he said, breaths. "It's the best reward I could ask for." It was in these small acts, these moments of sharing and care, that the depth of their connection became clear. They were not just two people living side by side. They were learning to rely on each other, to trust each other, and to find comfort in one another's presence. By the end of the second month, their bond had become undeniable. Samuel was no longer just a helper. He was a part of their lives. Ayanna found herself looking forward to his visits, to the quiet conversations by the fire, and to the moments when she could share her burdens without fear of judgment, respect. Samuel in turn felt a growing sense of responsibility and care for both Ayanna and her son, recognizing that he had come to value their well-being as deeply as his own. Though the townsfolk still whispered and some looked on with skepticism, Samuel and Ayanna paid little attention. Their connection was built not on appearances or societal approval, but on shared experiences, trust, and the small kindnesses that marked every day of their lives. And in the harsh, unpredictable life of the frontier, these small moments of understanding and care were worth more than any wealth, reputation, or recognition. By the time spring began to bloom across the plains, Samuel and Ayanna had become inseparable in practice, if not yet in name. Their lives had intertwined in ways neither could have predicted, each bringing comfort and strength to the other. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, full of challenges, dangers, and the ever-present threat of prejudice. They faced it with a growing confidence, knowing that together they could endure what the world threw at them. It was in these quiet weeks of shared work, small victories, and emotional honesty that the foundation of their story was laid. A story of trust, courage, and the beginnings of a bond that would soon face its most defining moment. The weeks passed, and the bond between Samuel Carter and Ayanna had grown stronger with every shared moment. The quiet companionship that had started with small acts of help had developed into something deeper. But Samuel still came to assist with the homestead, but now he also spent time teaching Ayanna's young son, little Kaya, how to ride safely and care for the animals. The boy had taken an immediate liking to Samuel, laughing and calling him Uncle Sam, and Ayanna often watched the two together with a soft smile she rarely allowed herself. It was a bright morning when the incident occurred that would change everything. Samuel had been helping repair the roof of Ayanna's small cabin after a spring storm had loosened several shingles. The wind picked up suddenly, rattling the boards and tossing dust into the air. Ayanna had been inside preparing breakfast and keeping Kaya nearby when she heard a commotion outside. Peeking through the window, she saw a group of men riding toward her property, outlaws from a neighboring town who had been causing trouble in the area. Their intentions were unclear, but their presence sent a wave of fear through her. Without hesitation, Samuel leapt down from the roof, landing lightly despite the weight of the tools he carried. His horse, tied nearby, whinnied nervously, sensing the tension. Ayanna, heart racing, realized how vulnerable they truly were. Brash. She had survived loss before, but never with her son alone in such danger. Samuel's calmness, however, gave her hope. He quickly assessed the situation, moving toward the approaching riders with steady determination. The outlaws shouted demands and threats, but Samuel did not falter. He guided Kaya behind the cabin and whispered instructions to Ayanna. "Stay low. Keep quiet. Don't move until I tell you." Her heart pounded, but she followed his guidance, trusting him completely. Breaths. He stepped forward, hands steady, voice firm, and began negotiating with the men. His knowledge of the terrain and his fearless demeanor unsettled the outlaws, who eventually decided the risk was not worth it and rode off, grumbling threats that they would return another day. After the danger passed, Samuel returned to Ayanna and her son. He was unharmed, though a faint scratch marked his forearm. Kaya ran to him, hugging his leg tightly, and Ayanna felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had known fear before, but seeing Samuel confronted for their safety awakened something deeper in her heart. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ayanna sat near the fire, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline of the day. She watched Samuel quietly tending to Kaya, helping the boy clean his scraped knees from running earlier. The sight of him being gentle, patient, and caring for her son stirred emotions she had not allowed herself to feel in months, perhaps years. Finally she spoke, her voice low but firm. Breath. "Samuel," she began, hesitating, unsure how to put the words into shape. She paused, taking a deep breath as she searched for courage. "I need someone like you. I cannot do this alone anymore. Please, I'll be your wife." The words hung in the air, fragile and powerful. Breath. Samuel froze for a moment, startled, not by her plea itself, but by the trust and vulnerability she had placed in him. It was a moment unlike any he had experienced, a raw and honest expression of need and hope. Ayanna's eyes, dark and earnest, met his, and he felt the weight of her words. She was not asking lightly. She was offering herself and her son to a life that had been uncertain and dangerous, hoping he would accept them both. The nearby trees swayed gently in the evening breeze, as if holding their breath. Samuel's mind raced. He knew. The world would not make this easy. A cowboy marrying an Apache widow in a frontier town could provoke judgment, whispers, and even hostility. Yet, Looking at her, seeing her strength and the trust she placed in him, he felt a quiet certainty rising within him. Ayanna waited, her chest tight, wondering if she had misjudged him. She had faced loss and disappointment before, and the thought of being rejected now was almost unbearable. She glanced at Kaya, who was asleep nearby, trusting the man who had become so important to their small family. Her plea was not just for herself, it was for her son, for the hope of safety, stability, and love. Samuel knelt beside her, lowering his eyes to hers. "Ayanna," he said carefully, his voice gentle yet firm, "you have nothing to fear from me. I will protect you and your son. I will stand by you, not as someone who saves you, but as someone who shares your life. I will be your husband if you want me to." Ayanna's lips trembled, and a tear rolled down her cheek. Relief and joy mingled in her chest. She had expected hesitation, perhaps even refusal, but instead Samuel had offered his heart and his word. In that moment, the bond they had built over weeks of quiet work and shared moments became something undeniable, a foundation for a life together. The townsfolk soon noticed a change in the way Samuel and Ayanna moved about the homestead. They were no longer simply neighbors helping one another. They were partners, caring for each other openly, though still with a quiet dignity that kept them apart from gossip. Some townspeople murmured in surprise at the bond forming between a cowboy and an Apache widow, while others observed with admiration. Samuel's decision had stunned them, not because it was unwise, but because it was bold, honorable, and genuine. Over the following days, Samuel and Ayanna worked together to strengthen both their home and their trust in each other. They repaired fences, organized the small barn, and tended to Kaya's education and well-being. Through these tasks, they learned more about each other's strengths, fears, and hopes. Samuel admired Ayanna's determination and intelligence, while she grew to appreciate his patience, fairness, and courage. One afternoon, they worked on the small garden behind the cabin. Samuel handed her a basket of seeds, and they planted them side by side. "This garden will grow," Samuel said softly. Just like our life here. If we care for it, it will be strong and lasting." Ayanna nodded, feeling the truth in his words. The metaphor was not lost on her. Life had been harsh and unpredictable. But with trust, care, and companionship, there was hope for something better. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she and her son could thrive, not just survive. Evenings became their time for quiet reflection. They would sit near the fire after the day's work, sharing small stories, comforting one another, and occasionally laughing at the simple joys of frontier life. Samuel began to teach Ayanna small lessons about riding safely across the prairie, reading the stars for navigation, and spotting dangers in the surrounding landscape. In return, Ayanna shared her knowledge of plants, tracking, and survival techniques that had been passed down through her family. Through these exchanges, their partnership deepened. It was no longer merely a relationship born of necessity. It was one built on respect, trust, and mutual care. And though the world outside their small homestead might judge, whisper, or disapprove, Samuel and Ayanna had discovered something far more valuable: the courage to choose each other despite uncertainty. As the sun set on the frontier, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ayanna looked at Samuel, her heart full. She had taken a risk in speaking her truth, in asking for a partnership that many might not have understood. But his response had proven that trust, honesty, and courage could lead to something beautiful even in the harshest circumstances. That night, as they closed the cabin doors and settled near the fire, Samuel placed a protective hand over Ayanna's shoulder. "Whatever comes," he said softly, "we face it together. You and Kaya, and me, We are a family now." Ayana smiled, feeling a warmth she had not known in months. The future was still uncertain, the frontier still full of danger. But for the first time, she felt ready to face it, with Samuel by her side and the quiet strength of trust and love growing between them. She knew that whatever trials lay ahead, they would endure, and perhaps even thrive. The story of the cowboy and the Apache widow, born from hardship and built on trust, was no longer just a quiet tale in Red Rock. It had begun to take shape as something real, resilient, and inspiring. Their journey was far from over, but the choice to stand together had set the stage for the next chapter, a chapter filled with challenges, courage, and the promise of hope. The morning after Ayana had made her heartfelt plea, the town of Red Rock was unusually quiet. Word had spread quickly. Though no one spoke openly, the townsfolk exchanged knowing glances in the streets, wondering what Samuel Carter would do. Few had expected him to respond as he did, and the anticipation hung thick in the air. Samuel, however, was not concerned with gossip. He had spent the night thinking carefully, not about appearances, but about the truth he felt in his heart. Ayana, meanwhile, woke early and busied herself with chores, though her mind was far from the work. She had spoken her truth, and now the uncertainty weighed heavily on her. Could he truly accept her and her son? Could they face the prejudices of a frontier town and the hardships of life together? The question swirled in her mind as she chopped wood and fed the animals, her hands moving automatically, but her heart tense with anticipation. Samuel approached the cabin mid-morning, carrying a small bundle of tools for repairs and a few extra supplies. He called a greeting softly, and Ayana's son Kaya ran to meet him with a grin, the bond between them so evident that it made Ayana smile despite her worry. Samuel handed Kaya a small bag of apples, and the boy's eyes lit up in delight. Then Samuel turned to Ayana. "I've made my decision," he said quietly, his voice steady. "It's not about fear or what others think. It's about what is right." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Ayana, I will be your husband. I will stand by you and your son. We will face life together as a family." Ayana's eyes widened, a mixture of relief and disbelief washing over her. Her lips trembled, and for a moment she could not speak. Then, finally, she whispered, You mean it?" "I do," Samuel replied firmly. "I mean every word." "I don't promise it will be easy. The world can be harsh, and not everyone will understand. But I promise you this. We face it together, and we protect each other no matter what comes." For the first time in months, Ayana felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Tears gathered in her eyes as she stepped closer, reaching out to touch his hand. The trust, the hope, the courage she had spoken into existence was now returned to her in full measure. Samuel's response was not just a simple yes. It was a commitment to partnership, respect, and love, built on the foundation they had quietly forged over weeks of shared work and understanding. Word of Samuel's decision spread quickly through Red Rock, and the townsfolk were stunned, breaking. Some openly whispered in disbelief. A cowboy marrying an Apache widow? Many had assumed he would reject her plea, fearing scandal or social disapproval. Others watched with admiration, impressed that a man could make such a courageous and honorable choice. The boldness of his response challenged expectations and began to change the way the townspeople viewed both Samuel and Ayana. The days that followed were filled with preparation and planning. Samuel helped Ayana and Kaya secure the cabin, strengthen the fences, and gather supplies for the coming weeks. The trio worked tirelessly, not just to improve the homestead, but to build a shared life. Samuel showed Ayana how to store food properly, maintain the livestock, and prepare for sudden weather changes. In return, Ayana shared her knowledge of local plants, survival techniques, and the lessons her late husband had taught her about living off the land. Each exchange of skills, each shared task, strengthened their bond and deepened their trust in one another. Evenings became moments of quiet intimacy and reflection. After the work was done, Samuel, Ayana, and Kaya would sit near the fire, talking about small dreams and plans for the future. They laughed at small mistakes, shared stories of past hardships, and reveled in the simple pleasure of each other's company. These evenings were a world away from the harsh realities of frontier life, a place where their connection could grow in safety and peace. One evening, Samuel and Ayana were repairing a section of the fence that had weakened during a recent storm. Kaya played nearby, learning the names of different plants and the sounds of the animals. Samuel handed Ayana a hammer, showing her how to secure a loose post. She followed his instructions carefully, and for the first time she felt a sense of partnership rather than assistance. She was no longer just the widow who needed protection. She was a partner, learning, contributing, and standing beside him as they built a shared life. "You know," Samuel said, wiping sweat from his brow, "I've spent a lot of time on my own, traveling from town to town. I never imagined I'd find someone I could truly care for, let alone someone who understands this life the way you do." Ayana paused, looking at him carefully. Breath. "I never thought I'd meet someone I could trust like this," she admitted. "Someone who sees me and my son not just as someone to help, but as people worth knowing and caring for." Samuel nodded, his expression soft. "That's how it should be," he said. "Everyone deserves that. And I want to give it to you both as best I can." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft rustling in the bushes near the edge of the property. Samuel immediately stood, hand resting on his side near where he kept a small revolver. Ayana froze, instinctively stepping behind him. "But it was only a deer, startled by their presence and bounding away into the forest." Samuel relaxed and laughed softly. "Even the wildlife wants to test me," he joked. Ayana smiled, the tension of the moment breaking, and they continued their work side by side. As the days went on, the town slowly adjusted to the news. Operations, while others kept their distance, uncertain what to make of the union. But Samuel and Ayana did not let public opinion dictate their lives. They focused on their family, on the practical challenges of frontier life, and on the emotional connection that had brought them together. One afternoon, as Samuel worked on repairing a broken wheel on the wagon, Ayana brought him a small lunch of bread, cheese, and fresh fruit. They ate together in silence for a while, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the comfort of being together, building a small fort from sticks and rocks. Watching the boy laugh freely, Ayana felt a deep sense of gratitude. This life, which had seemed impossible just weeks before, was becoming real. Samuel's choice had given her hope, and their shared work was turning that hope into reality. That evening, after the work was done, they sat by the fire once more. Samuel handed Ayana a small bundle of herbs he had found while exploring the nearby hills. "For your garden," he said with a smile. "I thought they might do well with your other plants." Ayana accepted them gratefully. Breaths. "Thank you, Samuel," she said softly. "For everything. For your care, your patience, for trusting me, for trusting us." He reached out, gently placing his hand over hers. "We trust each other," he said, "and that's stronger than any storm, any danger, or any gossip in this town." The night grew quiet, and the three of them, Samuel, Ayana, and Kaya, settled near the fire, feeling a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. Rest. Their bond was no longer tentative or uncertain. It had become real, tested by challenges and strengthened by trust, care, and mutual respect. In the weeks that followed, Samuel and Ayanna continued to build their life together, bravely repaired the cabin, planted a small garden, and made plans for the future. The town began to see them not just as a cowboy and a widow, but as a family. Their partnership was practical, emotional, and courageous, a rare example of trust and commitment in a harsh and often unforgiving world. Through it all, the lesson was clear. Love and trust could overcome fear, prejudice, and uncertainty. Samuel's bold choice had not only stunned the townsfolk, but had created a foundation for a new life filled with hope, resilience, and partnership. And though challenges would continue to arise, they now faced them together, stronger than they had ever been alone. As the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the prairie, Samuel and Ayanna stood side by side, watching Kaya play in the fading light. Their hands brushed, a small gesture of connection, comfort, and commitment. The frontier was still wild, the world unpredictable, but for the first time they felt ready to face it together. Their story, once uncertain, had become a testament to courage, honesty, and the strength of human connection in even the harshest of circumstances. Spring had fully arrived in Red Rock, bringing with it long days of warmth, fresh green grass across the prairie, and the soft sounds of life stirring after a harsh winter. Sadness as, the days were still unpredictable. Storms could roll in suddenly, and dangers from outlaws or wild animals were never far. But for Samuel, Carter, and Ayanna, life had begun to take on a rhythm and peace that had once seemed impossible. Their partnership, born from trust and necessity, had grown into something resilient, tender, and real. Samuel woke early, as he always did, to tend the horses and prepare the tools for the day's work. Kaya, now accustomed to seeing Samuel at the homestead, ran to him with a grin, asking if he could help with feeding the chickens. Samuel laughed and ruffled the boy's hair. "Of course," he said, "but remember, it's a responsibility, not a game." Ayanna came out of the cabin, carrying a small basket of freshly picked vegetables from their garden. Her hats were light, but her eyes were attentive, always noticing the details that kept the homestead safe and orderly. When she saw Samuel and Kaya working together, a small smile touched her lips. These moments of ordinary life, filled with laughter, care, and shared labor, had become the threads that wove their lives together. After breakfast, Samuel and Ayanna walked to the edge of the property to inspect the fences and make sure the livestock had enough water. As they worked, they shared stories of the past, of people they had known, and dreams of what the future might hold. There was no rush in their speech, no tension in their movements. They had found a rare balance, mutual respect and companionship that made even the toughest work feel lighter. The townsfolk began to notice the change in them. Where once whispers had been full of skepticism, now there were quiet nods of respect. Samuel had earned a reputation not only as a skilled cowboy, but as a man of honor, willing to stand by Ayanna and her son without hesitation. Ayanna, in turn, was seen not merely as a widow, but as a capable, intelligent woman, whose strength had been recognized and valued by the man she trusted. Slowly, their lives became accepted and respected by the community. One afternoon, Samuel repaired the roof of the barn and Ayanna tended the garden. A neighbor approached, carrying news from town. "I hear people are talking about you two," he said, half in admiration and half in curiosity. "Great," said Samuel. "Carter has taken the widow and her son as his own." Samuel glanced down at his work, adjusting a loose board, and then looked at Ayanna. She gave him a small, reassuring nod. Samuel straightened and spoke firmly. "We live our lives our way," he said. "It's no one else's concern, and it never will be. What matters is that we take care of each other and this land." "That's all that counts." The neighbor nodded, sensing the seriousness in Samuel's tone. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving the couple to their work. Ayanna turned to Samuel, a small smile forming. "You always know how to handle people," she said softly. Samuel shrugged. "Not always." he replied. But I know how to handle what matters most.
He gestured toward Ayana and Kaya.
Bay. And that's right here. Their days were filled with practical tasks, mending fences, tending the animals, repairing the cabin, and preparing food, but the work was no longer lonely or burdensome. Each task became a shared experience, a way to strengthen their bond and build a life together. Even in the most mundane chores, there was laughter, conversation, and care. Kaya, full of curiosity, learned quickly from both Samuel and Ayana, picking up lessons about the land, the animals, and the importance of honesty and responsibility. One evening, after a long day of work, Samuel and Ayana sat outside the cabin, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and pink, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers. Kaya had fallen asleep near the fire, exhausted from his day of play and learning. Samuel reached for Ayana's hand, holding it gently in his own. "We've come a long way," he said quietly. "From the first day I met you here, to now. It feels like a lifetime and yet only the beginning." Ayana leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his presence.
"It does," she agreed. "I never thought life could feel this good."
Safe, happy, and full of hope. I've always thought happiness was fleeting, but now I see it can last if you fight for it and care for it together. Breath. Samuel nodded. "We fight for it every day," he said, "but we do it together. That's what makes the difference." As the weeks turned into months, the couple began to truly settle into their life. They planted a larger garden, ensured Kaya's education with small lessons from Samuel about reading, writing, and arithmetic, and taught him practical skills that would keep him safe in the wild frontier.
Ayana taught Kaya about her heritage, the traditions of her people, and the lessons of her people and courage that had been passed down through generations.
Respect. Together, Samuel and Ayana created a space where knowledge, love, and respect coexisted, giving Kaya a childhood full of guidance, warmth, and trust. One morning, Samuel and Ayana received a message from the town. Francis had, despite advice on livestock and land management, having heard of Samuel's skills. Instead of dismissing them, Samuel and Ayana offered guidance, visiting a few farms and teaching practical skills. Their reputation as helpers, not just as individuals surviving life's hardships, began to grow. People saw them as a family who could balance survival, kindness, and courage. Despite the successes, challenges still arose. Storms could damage fences or wash away crops, and occasional threats from outlaws or wild animals reminded them of the dangers of frontier life. Yet, with each trial, their partnership strengthened. Samuel's calm strength and Ayana's knowledge and courage complemented each other perfectly. Each problem faced together reinforced the trust and respect that had grown between them. One afternoon, as the sun began to lower in the sky, Samuel and Ayana walked along the edge of their property, surveying the land they had worked so hard to maintain. Kaya ran ahead, chasing a butterfly across the meadow. Samuel took Ayana's hand, holding it tightly, and said, "This land, this life, it's ours. Not perfect, but ours. And no matter what comes, we face it together." Ayana smiled, her eyes bright with emotion. "It is ours," she agreed, "and I wouldn't trade it for anything." She paused, looking out over the fields they had worked tirelessly to cultivate. "We've built more than a home. We've built a life. One that's full of hope, love, and strength." Samuel nodded, squeezing her hand. "And we keep building it," he said. "Every small step we take, every challenge we face, makes it stronger." That evening, as the stars emerged in the clear frontier sky, The family sat near the fire. Kaya fell asleep on a blanket, exhausted but happy, while Samuel and Ayanna shared quiet conversation, laughter, and the peace that came from knowing they had found each other. Life would always be unpredictable on the frontier, but they had discovered something far more important than certainty: trust, companionship, and the courage to face the world together. The story of the cowboy and the Apache widow, once whispered in doubt and surprise by the townsfolk, had become a story of hope, respect, and resilience. Samuel and Ayanna had not only survived the hardships of frontier life, but had created a family built on mutual care, understanding, and love. Their story was no longer just a tale of survival. It was a testament to what people could achieve when they trusted each other, faced challenges together, and committed to building a life with honesty and courage. In the quiet of the evening, Samuel watched Ayanna adjust the blankets around Kaya and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This life, which had seemed impossible at first, was now real. Together they had created a home, a family, and a future filled with hope. And though the prairie stretched endlessly around them, wild and untamed, Samuel knew that they could face it all: storms, hardships, and uncertainty, as long as they faced it together. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of spring flowers and fresh grass, and the fire flickered warmly in the cool night. Samuel and Ayanna sat together, hands intertwined, hearts connected, and spirits strong. Their journey, full of trials and courage, had brought them to this place, a place of safety, love, and a life they could truly call their own. For Samuel Carter, the wandering cowboy, and Ayanna, the Apache widow who had once walked alone, it was a place of possibility, of growth, and of family. Together, they had turned a story of hardship into one of hope, resilience, and lasting companionship. And in doing so, they proved that trust, courage, and love could overcome even the harshest of lands, the strictest of judgments, and the most uncertain of futures.